On June 15, 1944, on the island of Saipan in the Mariana Islands, the jungle environment was filled with the sounds of warfare, distant artillery fire echoing through valleys, palm fronds rustling in the humid tropical wind, and Pacific waves relentlessly crashing against volcanic rock formations. Deep within a concealed bunker carved into the hillside, hidden from American area reconnaissance, Lieutenant Commander Yoshio Yamamoto focused intently through his military-grade headphones. His eyes were closed in deep concentration, his brow furrowed with frustration that had been building for months. Through the static and crackling interference that characterized radio communications in the Pacific theater emerged voices. Clearly American voices, but speaking in a language that defied all comprehension. The syllables were harsh and guttural, flowing in patterns that defied every linguistic framework he had studied during his years at the prestigious Imperial Naval Academy. These were not the Romance languages he knew, not the Germanic tongues he had encountered, not even the Slavic or Asian languages his training had covered. He frantically recorded phonetic approximations, attempted to identify possible word breaks, and searched desperately for any analytical foothold that might provide the breakthrough his superiors demanded. Three of Japan's most accomplished and decorated cryptographers worked alongside him in that cramped, humid bunker, hunched over notebooks filled with countless pages of attempted translations, their faces showing the exhaustion of men who had been working 18-hour days for weeks on end. For 18 months, a year and a half of intensive, dedicated effort, they had been intercepting these mysterious transmissions. It had been 18 months of endless recordings, sophisticated frequency analysis, complex pattern recognition studies, and consultation with every linguistic expert the Empire could locate. Yet all of it had yielded absolutely no results, no progress, no understanding whatsoever. The Americans were transmitting without any encryption devices, without the mechanical scramblers that typically protected military communications, without code books or cipher wheels. They were speaking clearly and openly, transmitting precise battlefield coordinates, detailed troop movements, and specific artillery strike locations, information that could fundamentally change the course of battle, intelligence that could save Japanese lives or win entire campaigns, openly across radio waves that the Japanese monitoring stations captured perfectly. The signals were strong, the reception was clear, the recordings were of excellent quality. Yet despite all this technical success and interception, the Japanese could not understand a single word. It was maddening, it was unprecedented, it was terrifying. Japanese intelligence, a history of success. By mid-1944, the Imperial Japanese Army had become extraordinarily proficient at intercepting and decoding Allied communications. This was not a new capability, but rather the culmination of decades of investment in signals intelligence. Early in the Pacific War, during the heady days following Pearl Harbor, when Japanese forces seemed unstoppable across the Pacific and Southeast Asia, Japanese intelligence operations had achieved considerable and sometimes remarkable success breaking American codes. They had successfully read U.S. Navy dispatches, accurately anticipated fleet movements with enough precision to prepare ambushes, and expertly exploited careless radio discipline among less experienced American units. Japanese cryptographers were not merely competent, they were highly trained professionals, the intellectual elite of the military intelligence community. Many had been educated in Western universities, including institutions in the United States and Britain, spoke fluent English with barely detectable accents, and were exceptionally well-versed in advanced mathematics, linguistic theory, and cryptanalysis techniques. These men represented some of the brightest minds the empire could recruit. They had successfully cracked British ciphers that were considered quite sophisticated, decoded Chinese transmissions that revealed strategic planning, and even penetrated certain Soviet intelligence networks during the border conflicts of the 1930s. These were not amateur codebreakers working with primitive methods, but skilled professionals equipped with the best technology available and supported by extensive research departments. They had access to captured codebooks, defector intelligence, and sophisticated radio directing finding equipment. They understood encryption technology at the deepest levels, knew the mathematical patterns underlying military codes, and had developed proven methodologies for cryptanalysis. They had intercepted and cataloged thousands upon thousands of Allied messages and built entire intelligence operations, employing hundreds of personnel and consuming significant military resources on the fundamental assumption that with sufficient time, adequate resources, proper analysis, and expert application of cryptographic principles, any human-designed code could eventually be broken. However, despite all their expertise, training, resources, and previous successes, they had not anticipated that the Americans would deploy a system that rendered traditional cryptography entirely irrelevant. A code built not on mathematics, logical patterns, or substitution ciphers, but on something far more fundamental: culture, ethnic identity, and the voices of men whose ancestors had inhabited the American continent for thousands of years before any European explorer's ship touched its shores, before any colonial power claimed dominion, before the very concept of America existed in any form. Origins of the Navajo Code: turning oppression into victory. The revolutionary concept that would baffle Japan's best minds was proposed in 1942 by Philip Johnson, a white civil engineer who possessed an unusual background that made him uniquely qualified to recognize this opportunity. Johnson had grown up on a Navajo reservation as the son of Protestant missionaries, living among the Navajo people, learning their language as a child, and developing a deep appreciation for its complexity and uniqueness. He recognized something that military planners, despite all their strategic brilliance, had completely overlooked. The Navajo language was extraordinarily complex in grammar, deeply tonal in its pronunciation, and critically, completely unwritten in any standardized form. Fewer than 30 non-Navajos in the entire world could speak the language with any degree of fluency, and careful investigation revealed that none of them were Japanese nationals or had any connection to Japan. The language had no alphabet in the traditional sense, no linguistic relatives outside the American Southwest region, no presence in any academic curriculum at any university in the world, and no representation in any military or intelligence training program anywhere. It represented, in essence, an unbreakable cipher created not by mathematical genius or mechanical engineering, but by history itself, by geographic isolation, by cultural preservation, and by the determination of a people to maintain their identity despite overwhelming pressure to assimilate. The first 29 Navajo recruits, who would later be honored as the original Code Talkers, arrived at Camp Pendleton in California in May 1942. These young men, ranging in age from their late teens to mid-20s, came from the remote mesas and harsh deserts of Arizona and New Mexico, regions of stark beauty and difficult living conditions. Many had attended government-run boarding schools where, in a cruel irony that history would later reverse, they had been severely punished for speaking their native language. School administrators had beaten them, washed their mouths with soap, and subjected them to humiliation and psychological abuse for using Navajo words. The government policy had been explicit and brutal: erase the native language, force assimilation, destroy indigenous culture. Now, in one of history's most remarkable reversals, the same government that had systematically attempted to suppress and eliminate that language was urgently asking these men to weaponize it, to use it as a tool of war, to transform what had been forbidden into what was essential. The young Navajo men, despite every reason to refuse, despite the discrimination they and their families faced, despite being denied basic rights, including voting in some states, chose to serve their country with distinction and honor. Developing the code within a code. The recruits, working closely with Marine Corps cryptographic specialists who recognized their own limitations in this unique project, developed a sophisticated and multi-layered code within their already complex native language. Since traditional Navajo had no words for modern military terminology, concepts like tank, submarine, fighter plane, and aircraft carrier simply didn't exist in a language developed over centuries in the desert Southwest. The Code Talkers had to create them through an ingenious system of metaphorical substitution. A tank, with its armored shell and slow, deliberate movement, became chindi, meaning tortoise. A submarine, lurking beneath the waves in its metallic hull, became beshlo, meaning iron fish. A dive bomber, swooping down on targets from above, became guni, meaning chicken hawk. An aircraft carrier became tsirimofa, yehi, meaning bird carrier. A battleship became loso, meaning whale. Each translation was logical within Navajo cultural references, making the system easy for Navajo speakers to learn and remember while remaining completely opaque to outsiders. The alphabet itself was encoded using animal names, creating yet another layer of complexity. A was Wulachi, meaning ant. B was Shush, meaning bear. C was Moisi, meaning cat. However, recognizing that simple substitution could potentially be vulnerable to pattern analysis if enough transmissions were intercepted, each letter was assigned multiple Navajo equivalents to prevent frequency analysis, the primary tool cryptographers use to break substitution ciphers. The letter A might be transmitted as ant, apple, or axe, depending on which Navajo word the speaker chose. This meant that even if someone somehow learned that Wulachi meant the letter A, they still couldn't decode messages because the next occurrence of the letter A might be transmitted completely differently. The system was elegant in its design, instantaneous in its implementation, requiring no encryption machines or codebooks, and completely impenetrable to anyone without native fluency in Navajo and knowledge of the specific military vocabulary the Code Talkers had created. Deployment across the Pacific. Voices in the jungle. Throughout the brutal Pacific Theater campaign, on the blood-soaked beaches of Guadalcanal, where Marines first went on the offensive, at Tarawa, where casualties were horrific, through the nightmare of Peleliu, and on the volcanic sands of Iwo Jima, where one of history's most iconic photographs would be taken, wherever Marine Corps units advanced into hostile territory, Navajo voices followed through the radio waves. They transmitted precise coordinates for artillery strikes that could destroy enemy positions, called in desperately needed air support for units under attack, and relayed crucial troop movements that allowed commanders to make split-second tactical decisions, all in real time without any encryption delays whatsoever. A message that would require 30 minutes or more to encode and decode using the standard military cipher machines, during which time tactical situations could change dramatically and opportunities could be lost, could be spoken and understood by Navajo Code Talkers in mere seconds. This unprecedented speed, combined with absolute security, represented a revolutionary advantage in modern warfare, where timing often meant the difference between victory and defeat, between life and death for men in combat. The enemy's frustration when expertise fails. Japanese listening posts, sophisticated installations equipped with the best radio equipment the empire could produce, recorded everything they intercepted with meticulous care. Their analysts play the transmissions backwards at varying speeds, searching desperately for reversed English or any other familiar pattern. They conducted detailed syllable frequency analysis, hunting for repetitions and patterns that might reveal underlying structure. They compared recordings from different islands, from different battles, from different dates, looking for any consistency that might reveal how the system worked or what the messages meant. Their linguists, desperate for any breakthrough, consulted with experts in obscure Asian and Pacific languages from universities and research institutions, wondering if this mysterious tongue might be an unknown dialect from the Philippines, perhaps some remote tribal language from the Solomon Islands, or possibly something from the Dutch East Indies. Some speculated it might be a Native American language, but couldn't identify which one. And besides, they reasoned, surely there were no Native Americans serving in the military in significant numbers, a fatal misunderstanding of American society. Nothing worked. No methodology produced results. No amount of effort yielded understanding. Lieutenant Yoshio Yamamoto, who had previously broken American codes with distinction and received commendations for his work, who had studied at the University of California at Berkeley and spoke fluent English without accent, and who had been decorated for valuable intelligence work in China before the Pacific War began, sat in that stifling bunker on Saipan and confronted something more psychologically devastating than a difficult cipher. He faced the crushing realization that no amount of personal skill, no level of mathematical brilliance, no degree of dedication or persistence could penetrate this barrier. The code was not simply complex or sophisticated, it was foreign in a way that transcended conventional analysis, that existed outside the realm where his expertise could function. After the war, acknowledgement and respect. After the war ended in August 1945, during the extensive interrogations of Japanese military personnel conducted by American intelligence officers, Japanese intelligence specialists spoke with a mixture of profound frustration and genuine professional respect about their futile efforts against the Navajo Code. Major General Seizo Arasue, who had served as Chief of Intelligence for the Imperial Army and oversaw thousands of personnel, stated with remarkable candor that they never cracked the code despite years of trying, and furthermore, they could not even identify what language they were hearing. This admission from such a senior intelligence officer was extraordinary. Another captured officer, speaking through translators, admitted that they initially believed they were hearing a machine-based encryption system, so systematic and secure did it seem, so consistent were its patterns, only to discover through prisoner interrogations after various battles that it was simply human voices speaking freely without any mechanical intervention whatsoever. The realization had been shocking that what seemed like sophisticated technology was actually just men talking. One particularly thoughtful captured cryptographer, when presented with clear recordings of Navajo transmissions during his interrogation, listened carefully with professional attention, and then offered an assessment that revealed deep understanding. Whoever designed this system understood at a fundamental level that language itself could be a weapon of war. The Americans had not merely encrypted their words using standard cryptographic techniques. They had encrypted their very identity, making the code inseparable from culture, from history, from ethnicity itself.